Head of Education Policy and Advocacy at Save the Children. He joins us now live from London. Welcome to the News Hour. James, how do you get world leaders to get these children back to school?
I think the first thing is for them to recognise that governments around the world have put education at the forefront of their COVID recovery plans. Many of them have recognised that it needs to be front and centre. And then secondly, use the opportunities coming up to them to support these children. So at the end of July, there's the Global Education Summit, where there's an opportunity to fully fund the $5 billion replenishment of the Global Partnership for Education. And that $5 billion might seem daunting, but we've already seen significant pledges from Finland, Italy, and just today, the European Commission pledged 700 million euros to the partnership. And of course, the G7 summit starting this week is another opportunity for them to really put education front and centre of the COVID response.
And you know, I've looked at your report and it mentions countries like Guinea, Burkina Faso, Afghanistan, and these are poor countries where, you know, I imagine parents have no choice but to send their children to go out and work at the age of 10, for example.
Well, clearly the economic impacts and pressures on families in the pandemic have been huge, but at the moment, the parents of hundreds of millions of children simply don't have that choice because schools remain closed. So, yeah, certainly every day that schools remain closed, the risks of child labour goes up, but that's partly because of that. Parents tell us that education remains one of their top priorities, especially in a crisis. So when they have a choice, the data's clear. Parents want their children in school. I think it's up to us now to make sure they're supported in that, to make sure that schools are open, they know that parents know when they'll be open and what steps will be taken to make sure they're as safe as possible when they do.
And what's the relationship between countries that have had low vaccination rates and children out of school?
There's certainly a strong relationship, sadly, and I think we see that where the countries where children have lost the most school days, but also the countries where COVID vaccination rates tend to be lower. The WHO recognises that teachers and school staff are a priority group where there's transmission of COVID, and vaccinating teachers is going to be an important part of sustainably getting children back to school. So certainly we want to see the rich countries, G7, OECD donors, take urgent action to fund and share vaccines as well as funding education. This is all crucial to if we're going to support the next generation in their recovery from COVID and recovery from the sacrifices they've made for our public health.
And what impact does it have on a girl's life or on a boy's life, children, to be out of school from such a young age? And is there a difference?
There's certainly a big impact. I think when you see that that girls are losing much more proportionally of their school lives than boys are, that impact of the closures we've seen already is going to be bigger. And while schools are closed, we know that 4 out of 5 children have said they're learning little or nothing. The World Bank's estimated that long term, that learning loss from just a few months of school closures will already lose the current generation as much as $10 trillion of future earnings. But more pressingly, urgently, I listened to children like Karina, a 17-year-old girl from South Sudan, who says simply that the biggest concern that girls who've not been attending school will be forced into child marriage. Already, we've predicted that 2.5 million girls have probably gone into early or forced marriage because of the pandemic. And that's as well as child labour risks you mentioned just before this, of FGM, other gender-based violence, and the school meals that hundreds of millions of children are still missing out on every day, often crucial nutrition they depend on. So big long-term impacts on their future earnings and careers, but really urgently big impacts and risks to their safety that really illustrate how important it is that we get schools back open.
Absolutely, and all over the world. Thank you so much, James Cox from Save the Children in London.